I've seen the Smile tapes twice now, and I've wanted to make a video about it both times. I think it's an interesting series and has much more to talk about it than the premise suggests. In case you don't know, the Smile tapes is about this alien, fungus, drug, vision thing that contorts people's faces into smiles and turns them pretty much into death machines. It sounds very generic, and in some ways the series is, but there's also more going on. I'm very much conflicted on this. There's a bunch I like about the idea and execution, but also a lot I don't. From what I can tell, most people don't adore this series, but there's also a few, myself somewhat included, that's surprised at the negative backlash. So, this is going to be my very first pro and con style review. That really best fit the thoughts of my series as a whole. So, let's get straight into it. Pro, the claustrophobic editing style. This is one of the most underrated things about the series in my opinion. When it comes to analog horror, the editing does a lot to create the feeling of the whole series. Not just the timing, but also building the digital space where you're going to be spending most of your time. And I think they did a great job of that here. This series, right from the get-go, feels claustrophobic. It has a small aspect ratio, the visuals are crusty and blurry as hell, and the audio is really shoddy. While you could argue that it goes over the top, I'd say it does a fantastic job at making the world more stylized and the threat more overbearing. I definitely felt this mostly at the beginning, where the style was being used more. It felt like you were in a cold, padded room with mayhem happening all around you, a feeling which I was really glad to see developed as the series went on. I find it really frustrating when analog horror series have lackluster editing, most notably with something like the original Vita Carnis documentary, and I'm glad to say that that really isn't an issue here. Con. It's really episodic. This is probably the biggest thing holding the series back for me. Smile tapes is really episodic. Like, basically every 5 minutes the point of view switches, and worse than that, the plot points from earlier usually aren't gone back to. This really sucks because as you watch more and more, it becomes less and less engaging. You stop caring about the new people because you didn't stop caring about the old people. There are a fair few examples of this. There's the first two patients, there's the hiker's death, there's the morticians for the majority of the series. All of these people are pretty much forgotten as soon as their story ends. It just sucks because it eventually starts feeling less like actual stories and more like different vessels to explore the smile drug, and that's just not as engaging. It's the exact same for seemingly important bits of lore, though I'll explore that a little more in the next con. The episodic nature is something that I didn't mind at the beginning, but as the series went on, it became clearer that the stories weren't really going to have an ending, and it messed up the series more than anything else in my opinion. This is very obviously something that I reckon would have been fixed if the series had have kept on going, something I'm going to say about a lot of the cons. That's pretty frustrating, but at least the issues are with things that aren't there rather than things that are. Pro, a lot of the visuals. Look, the visuals at the start of this series are not very good, but after the first 10 minutes it gets way better. It has some pretty grotesque and shocking imagery, along with some very nicely stylized found footage sequences. There really is a blurry, grimy style that this series falls into, and the visuals back it up a lot. The entire chase scene and what follows after it is definitely where these visuals stand out the most. It's super cool and a great extension of what had been building up beforehand. It reminded me a lot of the Mandela Catalog's Volume 333, with its way of hiding the monster all the way up until the very end, and I really appreciated that about it. A lot of the faces later on in the series are also kinda chilling. I know it's really easy to harp on about how try-hard the scares in this one are, but honestly, I think they really managed to make it work by the end, with two in particular standing out. The way both of these just stare directly at you with nothing else to focus on and some decent gore surrounding them, I just found it to be a really disturbing visual. I genuinely think the visuals enhance the story by the second half, and even at their worst, they're still pretty iconic. Con. Too much stuff. This one's in line with the unfinished plotlines one, but there's too much stuff going on in this series. Let's take a look at the actual smile disease. It's introduced to us as being a drug, simple enough. Then we learn that it's also a kind of fungus, which isn't that far of a stretch. Then there's the implication that it's from space, which is just what the flip. And also it makes you see this guy in space while you dream, so it's also kind of a vision thing being commanded by this entity, and I can't concentrate, just pick one, pick one! It's pretty similar with the actual smile victims as well, though in a different way. Smile victims are introduced to us as not surviving very long after being infected, and then later on are posed as this high danger threat that can't die. I was never really fully on board with what the smile victims even were, because they could never be easily defined as a single thing. In fiction as a whole, that's not too bad, but with analog horror, where you get a much more limited window to communicate information to your audience, it's important to keep things relatively simple. If you can't explain the plot of your analog horror in a single sentence, then that really isn't a very good thing. I will mention that things like Gemini and Local 58 get away with it because it's about an entire planetary invasion, rather than just one drug/fungus/alien/guy. Pro, the individual plotlines. Now, while each of the stories didn't have as much payoff as I would have liked, I think each one is really investing, particularly because of their great build-up. We're talking Sean Gomez, we're talking the hiker, we're talking the entire catastrophe thing near the end. I think the build-up works due to a combination of good writing and a good sense of mystery. While the ambiguity around the Smile victims doesn't make for a fantastic story in hindsight, it makes for a great mystery in the heat of the moment. It creates an awesome amount of suspense, which is one of the most fun kinds of horror in my opinion. Alongside this, the pretty great writing, especially by analog horror standards, made the characters in these situations investing really quickly. I don't know why, but as soon as he was on screen, I liked the hiker. Maybe it was how he was the first wholesome thing to happen in the series. It's similar for Sean, his logs felt realistic, and it made the ongoing turmoil much more interesting. At the end, with the chaos plotline, I had no idea what was about to come next, and that kept me very invested. I was worried about what Sean had been told to do. I really wanted the hiker to turn back. I was just generally really invested in the mini stories that were in each volume, and that's not something I can say about all or even most analog horrors. Con, the payoff. As a parallel to the build-up being great, the payoff usually isn't. Well, with one exception. Sean's plotline had a fantastic ending and it sets up the tone of the series super well. I love everything about that. But everything else is honestly just straight up bad. Like that hiker plotline. He just ends up dying in the end with some of the worst sound design I've seen in any analog horror. No real scare or cleverness, just the laziest thing you could have done. I'm not usually too harsh on things, but wow, is that a blunder and a half. It's the same with the catastrophe thing at the end. I'm guessing this is an issue with the series' premature ending, but I still don't really have any idea what those lights up above were. It's just unanswered and seemingly solves everything. It's okay to leave some things up to audience interpretation, but you have to at least end your stories logically. This, while not being my main issue with the series, is probably the thing I get most annoyed about because it should have been really easy to stick the landing. Pro, large scale concepts. Smile Tapes has some surprisingly ambitious ideas and things about it in its second half, and I always like to see that in analog horror. It really gets across this idea of a worldwide, monumental threat purely through what happens on screen rather than what's said, and I really like that about it. This makes it very unique in my opinion. While most analog horrors have the idea of worldwide panic, none of them get it across like this one. This one feels cinematic, with fires covering buildings, screaming echoing down the streets, having to navigate through the quiet parts of town to grab some bread. It's got a really strong ambience to it. I really like it when creators try to extend the use of analog horror, even in small ways, and I feel like the use of extinction level fear at the end makes up for some of the more generic horror in the beginning. Speaking of which, Con, the try hard feel. Yeah, I doubt I need to explain this one all too much. This series spends a lot of its runtime tackling pretty generic analog horror tropes. While I personally like these tropes most of the time, even I was getting a little tired of them the more it went on. It has basically everything: overbearing staticky visual effects, PSA style opening, being based off of personal logs, and obviously the main issue where the entire series gimmick is literally the exact same as what Germaface is making fun of. Most of its structure is so similar to things like the Mandela Catalog, the Walton Files, and Vita Canis that it's astounding. While I think some of these are executed pretty well, I can't deny that this series as a concept does feel almost like an analog horror parody at some points. Pro, they made the generic concept scary. For the last pro, I'd like to bring up how the execution of some of these more generic ideas was surprisingly effective. It would be very easy to completely screw up the idea of a horde of creepily smiling people being the main force in your analog horror, as I just got into, but the focus on the contortions and pain was a really smart thing to do. It's relatable. If you've ever smiled for 10 to 20 minutes straight, you know that it hurts, and I really felt that with some of the descriptions and case studies that we got early on here. It's the same thing with some of the gore and whatnot that I got into in the visual segment. This is one of the more creatively and darkly executed analog horrors I can think of, so even though there were a lot of generic concepts, I found myself not even caring about those for the most part. Con, the lack of characters. And for the last point I want to bring up, this series really would have been improved with some actual characters. Sean is definitely the best example of when that worked well, but other than him we got Miss Campbell the Mortician, the Hiker, that guy that appeared in people's dreams, who I'm pretty sure is this guy who was trending a few years back. These are less so characters and more so case studies, cookie cutters to show what the fungus is doing to people. Most strong stories need characters to view them through, and this one suffers from not having that. If we could at least have a central antagonist, I feel that would make the stakes much more palpable and interesting, not to mention the positive impact of having a protagonist to get invested in and want to win. My favourite parts of the Mandela Catalog have been whenever the protagonists we've been focusing on come face to face with a resurfacing villain, and for the Boiled one, it was getting invested in this one force of nature antagonist. This may have happened had the series continued, but it does make most of the plot points just that bit less interesting. Anyways, that was the Smile Tapes. Despite its many flaws, I respect almost all analog horror, and this one has plenty to appreciate about it. I'd give the series a 6 out of 10 overall, but a decently high one at that. You should watch it if you're into analog horror and have a little less than an hour to spare. Also, I watched Mule as well, and while I wasn't the #1 biggest fan of the filmmaking at first, it had some awesome visuals, and I really appreciated how it tied into one of the previously dropped plot lines, which I won't spoil. Also check that one out. Well, moving forward, we have the Gemini video, which was supposed to be out 2 weeks ago. I apologize for that. The Vita Canis video, and then another Mandela Catalog upload because you guys don't realize how long I could talk about the Mandela Catalog for. Alex Kister recently posted a sneak peek about Volume 6, so definitely looking forward to that one. I might also do a hard left turn onto Beat Saber with OST 8 just around the corner, so comment if you're interested in that. But that's probably about it. So stay indoors, kill it with fire, and cue the outro music. Smile Tapes has some surprisingly ambitious ideas and things that Smile Tapes has some surprisingly wow, and want to win. My favorite part. This may have happened had the series continued, but it does make most of the plot lines just plot lines.